My name is Bianca Foster. I'm 31, and I'm an insurance claims adjuster for a regional carrier outside Atlanta, Georgia, which means I spend my entire professional life reconciling exactly what happened against exactly what someone claims happened, using nothing but timestamps, records, and documentation that doesn't care whose version of events sounds more convincing. Accused by my own cousin of barely showing up during our grandmother's recovery from hip surgery, I stood in my grandmother's living room 2 months ago, at the small gathering marking her first day fully back on her own without a caregiver, and listened to a home care agency supervisor read my logged hours out loud from a tablet without anyone having asked her to. Bianca showed up what twice my cousin Renee had said to our aunts at a family lunch the week before, when I wasn't at. I was the one who was actually here for Grandma. If you're watching this, comment where you're from and what time it is right now for you, and hit subscribe, because this one's worth staying for. Let me take you back to where this actually started. My grandmother, Odessa Foster, broke her hip 9 months ago after a fall in her kitchen at 79, an injury that required surgery and a recovery period her doctors said could stretch anywhere from 4 to 8 months depending on how consistently she stuck with physical therapy and had someone checking in on her daily needs at home. My cousin Renee, who lives 15 minutes from Odessa, immediately stepped forward as the family's primary coordinator for her recovery, setting up a family group chat, researching home care agencies, and generally taking on the visible, organizing role our family tends to hand to whoever speaks up first. I live nearly 40 minutes further out, which meant I was never going to be the person doing quick daily drop-ins the way Renee could. But my work schedule for 10-hour shifts a week with 3 consecutive days off actually gave me something Renee's more conventional schedule didn't. Long, uninterrupted stretches of time I could dedicate entirely to my grandmother without needing to split my attention between her and anything else. Odessa raised 5 children largely on her own after my grandfather's construction business went under in the early 80s, working as an elementary school teacher for over 3 decades in the same small district outside Atlanta. A career that left her well-known and well-loved throughout the community, but never particularly well compensated. Her independence has always been a point of quiet pride for her, the kind of pride that made the hip fracture feel, to everyone in the family, like more than just a physical injury. Losing the ability to move through her own kitchen without help hit her harder emotionally than any of us fully anticipated going in, which made the tone of her recovery, not just its logistics, something the family took seriously from the very beginning. We settled as a family on hiring a licensed home care agency to cover the daily gaps neither of us could fill alone, splitting the cost and the oversight between family members who could contribute time, money, or both. I took on the role of primary scheduling contact with the agency, largely because my job had made me comfortable with exactly the kind of paperwork, authorization forms, and care hour tracking the arrangement required. Work that happened almost entirely through phone calls and a portal rather than anything visible to the rest of the family. Over the following 7 months, I personally covered 61 of my grandmother's care shifts myself, using my 3-day weekends to handle the mornings the agency's regular aide couldn't cover, logging each shift through the same agency portal the professional aides used, since Odessa's insurance required a documented, continuous care record regardless of who was providing it. I never posted about this in the family group chat, mostly because Renee had established herself early as the one publicly narrating Odessa's day-to-day progress, and partly because logging hours into a portal has never felt, to me, like something that needs a separate announcement. Renee, for her part, visited regularly, roughly twice a week for an hour or 2 at a stretch, genuinely valuable time that kept Odessa socially engaged and gave the family real, current updates on her mood and mobility. But somewhere over those 7 months, I check in on Grandma constantly became, in Renee's retelling, closer to I'm the one who's actually been here, a narrative that hardened gradually rather than through any single dramatic exaggeration. The specific claim that led to confrontation happened at a family lunch I missed due to a mandatory work training, where Renee told our aunts, according to my mother who related afterward, Bianca showed up, what, twice? I was the one who was actually here for Grandma, a comment my mother knew wasn't accurate, but didn't have the exact shift count to correct firmly in the moment. I felt genuinely stung hearing this secondhand, not because I needed public credit for logging care shifts, which I would have kept doing regardless, but because it erased something that had quietly become one of the most meaningful parts of my week for 7 straight months. Everything shifted 2 months ago. At a small gathering Renee organized at Odessa's house to mark her first full day without a scheduled caregiver, a milestone worth celebrating after such a long recovery. The agency's regional supervisor, Yolanda, stopped by that afternoon as a courtesy, standard practice when a long-term care plan formally closes out, to review the final paperwork with the family and confirm Odessa's discharge from active service. Yolanda, entirely unaware of any tension, pulled up the case file on her tablet mostly to double-check the discharge date, and mentioned, almost as an aside while scrolling, this has honestly been one of the more consistent family supplemented care plans I've worked on this year. 61 log shifts from a family member alongside our aide's regular schedule, all under Bianca Foster's account. That kind of coverage usually cuts recovery time down meaningfully, and I think it did here. The living room went quiet in that specific way a room goes quiet when routine paperwork accidentally contradicts a comfortable story. Renee's face shifted from pleasant to visibly uncertain. That seems like a lot, Renee said, her voice tightening slightly. I didn't realize it was logged like that. It has to be, I said, calm, my voice even, genuinely not wanting to make my grandmother's milestone about anything other than my grandmother. Insurance needed a continuous record, so every shift I covered went through the same portal as the agencies. I wasn't trying to keep score. I just needed it documented for Grandma's coverage to hold. My grandmother, sitting in her favorite chair, spoke up quietly but clearly. Bianca's been here every week she could manage, she said. I may forget things some days, but I remember who's been sitting with me. Renee's composure cracked slightly then, genuine embarrassment crossing her face. I didn't mean you weren't here at all, she said to me. I think I just measured everything by how often I personally saw you here, and I wasn't here on the mornings you were. That's exactly it, I said. You saw your own hours. You didn't see mine, so as far as you knew, they weren't happening. My grandfather, Curtis Foster, died 11 years before the hip fracture, and Odessa never remarried, choosing instead to build a life around her church, her card group, and a fierce, sometimes stubborn insistence on doing things herself that made the fall in her kitchen feel, to the rest of us, like a genuine turning point rather than a temporary setback. She resisted the idea of hired help at first, telling the family more than once that she'd raised 5 children without anybody's assistance, and didn't see why a broken hip should change that. It took her oldest daughter, my Aunt Patrice, sitting with her for an entire afternoon to gently talk her into accepting the agency's help at all. A conversation the rest of us only heard about secondhand, but that clearly shaped how cautiously everyone approached her recovery afterward. I want to talk about what those 61 shifts actually looked like, because I've compressed 7 months into a sentence about a portal and a shift count. My 3-day weekends became, almost entirely, my grandmother's mornings. I'd arrive around 7, help her through the physical therapy exercises her recovery plan required, exercises she found tedious and occasionally refused to do for the agency's actual aid, but somehow tolerated better from me. Maybe because I could be a little more stubborn about pushing her through them without feeling like I was overstepping. We fell into a rhythm over those months that had nothing to do with insurance portals. She'd tell me stories while I made her breakfast, about growing up in rural Georgia, about my grandfather courting her at a church function in 1968, about raising 5 children on a schoolteacher's salary during years when that salary genuinely wasn't enough. Stories I'd heard fragments of my whole life, but never in this much detail. Never with this much uninterrupted time for her to actually finish them. Some mornings were harder than others. There was a stretch in the 3rd month where Odessa's physical therapist warned the family that her motivation had started to slip, that the exercises were painful enough she'd begun quietly skipping them on days the professional aide wasn't there to supervise directly. I didn't know how to fix that exactly, so I mostly just sat with her through the discomfort, timing her sets on my phone the way I imagine a coach might, not pushing so hard that she resented the mornings, but present enough that skipping them felt harder than doing them. Her mobility scores, according to the therapist, improved noticeably during exactly the weeks I was covering the most shifts. A correlation nobody, but me and the agency's own records seemed to notice at the time. I also handled, without much fanfare, the parts of caregiving that don't make for good conversation at a family lunch. Refilling her pill organizer every Sunday night. Tracking which grocery items she'd actually finished versus which ones sat untouched in her pantry as a sign her appetite was struggling. Calling her primary care doctor's office twice to flag concerns before they became emergencies. None of that generates a good story to tell relatives over lunch. It just generates a slightly better outcome for the person actually living through the recovery, which mattered more to me than having a story to tell. I want to be fair to Renee in this story, because I don't think she set out to erase 7 months of my mornings deliberately. Renee's version of caregiving looked like conversation, presence, visible check-ins, and I think she genuinely measured the entire recovery through that lens, simply because it was the only lens she had access to. She never saw my Tuesday mornings, so as far as her own accounting went, they may as well not have existed. Renee works as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a job with a schedule that made regular short visits far more feasible for her than the long, uninterrupted mornings my own schedule allowed me to give. Her twice-weekly visits genuinely mattered to Odessa in a different, equally real way. A change of scenery, a different conversational rhythm, updates on the rest of the family that I honestly wasn't as good at delivering. I don't think either kind of caregiving is worth more than the other. I just think only one of them happened to be documented in a portal, which made it easy for Renee to overlook mine and impossible for anyone, eventually, to overlook it once Yolanda pulled up that file. The gathering continued, more quietly from Renee for the rest of the afternoon, though Odessa, thoroughly unbothered by the tension around her, mostly wanted everyone to admire how well she could now walk to the kitchen unassisted, a genuinely happy milestone that the rest of us refocused on soon enough. Renee found me in the kitchen later and apologized more fully, admitting she'd felt, throughout the recovery, a low simmering anxiety about not being able to do more given her own demanding work schedule, and had, without fully realizing it, inflated her visible role to compensate for that feeling. My grandmother is fully recovered now, walking without assistance, back to her weekly bridge game with 3 women she's played cards with for over 20 years. I still visit most of my 3-day weekends, though the visits look different now. Coffee on her porch instead of physical therapy exercises in her living room, and I've noticed she brings up those 7 months occasionally, unprompted, in a way that tells me they matter to her as much as they matter to me. Renee and I talk more honestly now about what we can and can't offer in situations like this. An adjustment neither of us expected, but both of us seem better for. She's told me since that she's started asking, in family caregiving situations generally, what other people are actually doing rather than assuming her own visibility represents the full picture, a small shift in thinking she credits directly to that afternoon in Odessa's living room. We've even started splitting future check-ins more deliberately, a shared calendar this time, so neither of us has to find out from a stranger with a tablet what the other one has quietly been carrying. Here's what I actually learned, standing in my grandmother's living room and listening to a care agency's routine discharge paperwork do more to correct the record than 7 months of quiet Tuesday mornings ever could on its own. Showing up consistently doesn't always look like anything from the outside if nobody's there to see it happen. People can tell a story about your absence as confidently as they like. They can't argue with a licensed agency's own shift log, 61 entries deep, time-stamped under your name for exactly the reason insurance required it to be. If this hit close to home, tell me in the comments about a time your quiet caregiving got measured against someone else's idea of what showing up looks like, and whether it ever got set straight the way mine did. Subscribe if you want to see how these stories keep unfolding. Share it with someone who's ever sat with a person they love on a morning nobody else witnessed, and I'll see you in the next one.